Good morning, everyone. I hope you guys are all doing well out there. We're doing fine over here. We've got a lot of things going on, as you guys might already know. If everything goes right, you'll be seeing this on Wednesday. And anyway, so today's video really is all about carving inset letters and how to use bits and what certain bits do. I want to go through not all of my router bits, but a lot of the router bits and cutting inset letters with these router bits and what it looks like. So I'm going to use a little sample, and it's going to be Clarendon letters, but you guys need to take into account that you probably want to do this with whatever it is that you're carving, whether it's artwork, whether you're doing a transfer method. We're using layout letters, and it really more depends on what you are carving and the context of what you're carving. But I'm going to give you just kind of a baseline of what certain router bits look like when you're cutting inset letters, and how different the cut is. So stay with us. Oh, actually, before we do that, before we go on to the next scene, take a look at the router bits that I'm going to be using. So we've got from your right to my left, or no, from your right to your left, we've got the profile bit. This is a standard profile bit that we have. It has been ground a couple times. You can see that. This is, and I've used this a lot, especially for inset letters. This is a profile bit, but has been ground a lot. So it's what I call a fat profile bit. And I really like this for inset letters, for a lot of inset letters. Then we move on to the 60 degree. This is a standard bit that I use for small 1-inch inset letters, and even 1.5 and 2-inch. I'll cut, a lot of inset letters with the 60. That's kind of my go-to for inset letters. Then we have the 1/8-inch spiral for people that like a flat background or a flat inset letter. The 1/8-inch spiral, which is a fairly new bit to me, but it works really, really well. I really like it. And then we have our standard spiral upcut. These are both spiral upcuts, 1/8-inch and 1/4-inch. And that will, you'll see what that does on smaller and bigger inset letters as well. So we are going to break this down, come back, and we'll be set up and we'll make some sawdust. So stick with us, we'll be right back. All right, so here's what my plan is. There's so many different variations and variables when it comes to cutting, especially inset, because you can have different depths. And anyway, so what I've done is I've got 1-inch, 1.5-inch, and 2-inch letters, and I'm going to use 5 different bits. I'm going to start with the profile bit over here and show you what the profile bit is and what the depth of my regular profile bit would be or is for the letter to look correct. Now, and I want to context this too. The reason that I use, people ask what kind of bits to use. The reason I use the bits that I use is because I have specifically picked those router bits out to be able to cut deep enough that they don't get too skinny when you start sanding off the top. If you do your signs the way I do, I carve, and then I generally spray the color, the black mostly, and then when I sand it off, you lose a little bit of thickness of your board, which means you also lose a little bit of width if you're carving with the V-groove bit, which the profile, the 60, the 90, all of them are V-groove except for the spiral upcuts that cut straight. They cut a 90 degree, they cut straight in. They don't have a V to them. It's complicated. Anyway, so I'm going to try and make this as simple as possible, especially for new people, because new people constantly ask me, how deep should I go? How deep should I go? And my standard answer is, I don't go by depth, I go by width. Well, this is going to explain exactly what I'm talking about. But again, to go back, the bits that I use, I'm able to cut deep enough that they don't cut so wide that you will lose the chance to do any detail. And then you get completely out of line of where you want to be. So it'll be more explicit, more explanation as we go along. So all right, so let's get started here. So I'm going to start with the profile bit. This is my standard profile bit. Excuse me, and then I'm going to move on from there. So this would be akin to a fairly new profile bit that's only been ground a couple times, maybe, whether you guys grind them yourselves or have somebody do it, or you send them to me. But it's been sharpened a couple times, but it's still pretty original as far as the size goes. The more you grind a bit, generally, at least on the profile bit, it becomes a wider cut, and we'll get into that in the second segment. So what I'm going to do, this is how I go about figuring out what depth I'm going to carve at. So I'm going to start with this 1-inch letter. I've got the profile bit in, and I think it's set at, I don't know, about 1/8 of an inch, but I think that's going to be too shallow. I don't know, but I'm going to make a cut with it, and then I'm going to adjust it to what I want it to be, how I want it to look, and then I'll stop the router and we'll figure out how deep it is. So here we go. Let me turn the light on. Let me plug it in.
Turn the power in.
Let me turn it off first. Assume that it is, anytime you plug a power tool in, assume it's on. So be prepared for it to go on. All right, I had it off. So now it's going to go on, hopefully. Not deep enough. Now, new people that haven't watched a lot of my videos will wonder, well, why did you do that little dip thing at the top and the bottom where they really are flat? That's just the way we've always done inset letters, the Clarendon inset letters. I've always liked the way it looked. Dad started doing that way back in the 70s, and I kind of adopted it because I liked it, and so that's what I do. And the other reason is it kind of gives you a little bit of room for error. Anyway, so I do a little dip at the top and the bottom of the letters on Clarendon, and I could do them on Bookman as well, because Bookman is a lot like a Clarendon font. I do that because that's what we learned a long time ago, that it gives you a little bit of room for error, and it looks kind of stylish. It kind of adds a little style to the letter. So that's the reason for anybody that is, just brand new watching and you haven't heard me say that. Now, let's figure out, that is the depth that I like for that. I could even go a little bit deeper, but that's the depth I like for it. So let me see what that actually is. That is set at about almost 3/16. Yeah, just a slightly under 3/16. So now I am going to cut the bigger letters, and I'm going to set it at a full 1/4 of an inch, because I certainly can. Now, again, you guys have to find out what you like, what style you like, and what bits that you want to use for cutting these letters. I kind of go back and forth. My dad always liked cutting inset letters with a profile bit. I like doing it with a more of an angle to it, like the 60. But this will give you an idea of what it looks like cutting deeper at a 1/4 of an inch. So that's, let me make sure, but I think that's set at a full 1/4 inch. Actually, it's just a tad over. But and that's all I'm going to cut on that. Doing this would be pretty much redundant of what I've done here. So I'm going to stay with just cutting that. I just don't see any reason to cut the bigger one. So we're going to move on to the next router bit, which will be the fat profile bit. So now we are moving on to what I call the fat profile bit, which is just simply, it's the same bit as we used before, but it has been ground probably dozens of times. Yeah.
Sideways just a little. Yep, sideways. There we go.
So this has been ground a lot. So we've kind of lost the 45 at the tip like would have normally been on the profile bit. Now it's pretty much one angle all the way down. This is starting to get close to the 60 degree. It's just cuts a little bit narrower and deeper than the 60 degree. That's why I really like it for inset letters. So let's cut that A. I think it's, well, right now, let's just go ahead and check it. It's set at about 3/16 right now. Let's see if that's right for the 1 inch A there. So 3/16 was a little too deep. Let's see what I backed it off to. Yeah, it's under 3/16 now, but it's more than an eighth. So you can figure that out. I don't know, what is that? 5/32 or something like that. But it's a little less than 3/16. But again, it all depends on what you are carving. So, but I want to give you some kind of a reference. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it I'm going to set it a little bit deeper, and then I'm going to go and cut that B, which that B is 1.5 inches. So I'm back to 3/16, maybe even a little bit more than 3. Yeah, I'm down. I'm almost at 1/4 inch now. Let's see how that works. And that's about where I would want it for there. I very, very rarely go more than 1/4 inch deep. It's just not necessary. But that, you can see that's pretty deep. Now the thing about these two cuts, which is going to be much different than this cut, which I'm going to use the 60, is the fact that you will not lose much width of the letter when you sand it off. So now if you can imagine, I spray these, I sand them off, because it's such a great angle, a narrow angle, you won't lose much width of that letter when you sand. Whereas the 60 is completely different than that, but we'll get into that next. So I think I'm going to go with the same thing that I've done here. There's no reason to cut that C. That would be, again, kind of redundant. You get the idea from from a shallow cut to a heavier cut there. So we will move on to the 60. Right, so now we've got the 60 in. Now, when I'm like out carving on site, and for years and years and years, small inset letters, the 60 would be all I would use. Dad, again, was more of in the school of using the profile bit, but I like to save the profile bit for outset letters. So the 60 allowed me to do inset letters faster, and so when I carve with the 60, it seems to go much faster for me. And that speed when you're carving on site really is a key factor that you have to take into account. So this is right now set at about 3/16, little less, but about 3/16. I think it's going to be too deep for that 1-inch inset letter. I'm going to check the width of the cut on a heavy area down here on this B, and then I'll know whether I need to adjust it and back it off a little bit, which I think I'll probably need to. Now, here's the thing when you're cutting with the 60, is that because it is more of an, more of an angle, what happens is as you take material off of this board when you're sanding, what's going to happen is that letter's going to get skinnier. That's the reason that you could see, especially on this leg, which is the skinny leg, I cut it and it ends up being the same size as this leg because I don't want that thing to be skinny. When you sand off inset letters and they end up looking really skinny, they just look, I don't know, they just look off, anorexic. They just don't look right to me. I need a good fat, I need some letter with some stoutness to it.
Some chunk.
Yeah. So let's find out how, and you can see, that's another thing that I wanted to address. One of the biggest reasons that I love the DeWalt 611 is the depth adjustment. When you're doing really fine depth adjustment, this Makita really is not great at that. In fact, it's not even good at it. So it's much more difficult to set the depth. I just put whatever bits. I normally keep the same bits in the same routers because I've got so many. But in this particular instance, I would have been better off using the DeWalt for this micro adjustment. So let's see where we are at depth-wise. So we are a little over 1/8 of an inch, not quite to 3/16. And you can see that first cut that I made, that would have been too wide for that. I still could have made it work, but it would have been too wide. So now I'm going to adjust this, make it a little bit deeper, and I'm going to cut that B. But as I'm trying to set it deeper, this Makita, it's really tough to set a micro depth with this like it is. It's super easy with the DeWalt because of that ring setup they have on it. Here we go. Now this is a perfect example of why I like to cut inset letters with the 60-degree bit. If you go back and you watch how long it took me to cut this one with the same letter, it should be exactly the same timeline, but I bet this one cut at least half the time that it took to cut this one, because of it just takes longer because it's a narrower bit. That's the reason that I started using the 60-degree when I was out on site carving. And honestly, I like the way it looks a little bit better. Yeah, it's a personal preference. If you've got plenty of time, but when you're carving on site trying to make time, man, the time that you save cutting from this example to this example is a matter of maybe another 2 or 3 letters. So it really cuts down on the time it takes to cut a board. Anyway, so I'm not going to, again, I think probably on, at least on these 3, I'm not going to cut the C. I think this kind of proved my point. You could also see that on this one I did go a little bit fatter because, again, this letter, when we sand it off, is going to be a little bit skinnier. So I want to be aware of that and cognizant of it. That's why I cut it a little bit bigger. So let's move on to the spiral bits. All right, so now we are on to the spiral bit. So this is, as I said before, this is kind of a new bit to us, the 1/8" spiral, but it really comes in handy in some places. And this is one, if you like a straight edge and you like a flat bottom, this is one that really will become, I think, would be really valuable for you. So I am going to, this is now, again, this is completely different in the fact that whether you take any surface off this board at all with your sander, it makes no difference now because that width is the same because it cuts a straight side. So let's get it cut and then we'll talk about it.
How deep is it?
Oh, it is right now. It's set at 1/8 inch deep. We're set at 1/8. We'll see how that looks. Okay, so there's several things you got to take into account when you're using one of these spiral upcut bits. Number one, you're taking out a lot more sawdust, so you're going to have more sawdust kicking around. That's not a big deal, not for me, but it might be for you. If you look at this cut as compared to this cut, this is all completely cleared away, so you're taking out more sawdust. Secondly, is you've got a sharp edge here, and if you are still learning with either using a belt sander or even your random orbital or your disc sander, the fact that you've got a sharp edge on little pieces could give you some issues. You've got to have a really light touch with your sanders because you've got sharp edges there that you can catch, whereas when you're cutting with the V-groove, not so much. You do have a surface there, but you don't have so many sharp edges, so you want to take that into account as well. Again, many people like this look. I like more of a V-groove. I like more of a texture when I'm doing background, but it becomes a personal preference. So now what I'm going to do, I don't need to, but I'm going to set it a little bit deeper. Again, the depth won't make any difference on the width of the cut at all, but I am going to set it a little bit deeper for these bigger letters. Here we go. The other thing that I want to talk about, and you could see it when I was coming down here, you could see that the bottom of the inside of this chipped off just a little bit. If you've got a chippy board, because of this thing being straight up and down, you're going to have more likely chances to have stuff chip out on you. This is cedar, a really nice cedar, so it's not a chippy board at all. But you still are going to have more issues with chipping with this straight cutter, whether it's a spiral upcut or whether it's a traditional straight flute. One way or the other, if you're cutting at a perfect 90-degree angle, which is what this is, then you're going to have some issues with chipping if the board tends to do that. All right, so one last bit. Let's move on to the 1/4 inch spiral. All right, so this is our standard 1/4 inch spiral upcut. The other one was an 1/8 inch. So I've got it set right at an 1/8 of an inch deep, which again, this is a straight sided bit, so it doesn't really matter on the depth. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to do that 1 inch A with this, and it's going to be a complete fail. But I want to show you guys it, and it probably will work for the 1.5 inch and the 2 inch, but I'm sure it's going to cut this way too fat. So this just gives you an idea that not every bit will work in every situation. So let's turn this around. Here we go.
Looks like an upside down V.
Yeah, so you can see that it cuts way too wide, cuts a full 1/4 of an inch wide. That's what happens when you try to use the wrong bit for the wrong purpose. Now, this bit does have a purpose. Now, when I go to bigger, and I'll probably do the 2 inch too, it might be just fine. Even though it'll cut wider there, the letter probably will still look okay. I think it's more built for letters that are bigger, and of course this is what you would want to use if you want a flat background when doing outset letters. So let's do these other two, see how we look. So that gives you almost no room for error, and you can see it's trying to chip a little bit. It looks really kind of, I don't know.
More like a block letter than a clear
Yeah,
letter.
it does. It just doesn't. It kind of just looks pregnant, and kind of just bubbly almost. Whereas this has much more of a defined look, as these do. This just looks too bubbly to me. But on the 2 inch, it might work better. Yeah, see, that looks much better. That looks, if you had bigger letters like that, you'd be much better off doing those. 1.5 inches, I think, are still a little tiny. So let's come back and we'll just wrap this thing up, and I'll give you my final thoughts.
just want to get it.
All right, so let's kind of go over this. So this is the profile. This is the fat profile. Remember, it's been ground a bunch of times, so you definitely want to keep those profile bits because they really come in handy later on when they get bigger. The 60 degree, the 1/8 inch spiral upcut, and the 1/4 inch spiral upcut. Again, when I'm carving on site, this really is my go-to for inset letters, and it looks just as good on bigger inset letters as it does smaller ones. But a lot of people, like my dad, always liked the more sharp edge. So there's just it really comes down to, guys, number one, the context of what you're carving. Now, if I was carving, if these were Western letters, it would be a lot different than this. If I was carving the fatty font, it would be a lot different than this. And obviously, a lot of you guys don't use layout letters. You use transfer method. And so it really depends on what it is you're carving. Everybody has their favorites. So there's just, the main thing that you want to remember is you want to be able to carve deep enough that when you sand it off, you don't lose the width of your letter. As an example, I think I did a video where I did a sample of a carving with a 3/8 60 degree bit. So again, I learned this way back when. A 60 degree bit or a 90 degree bit is different if it is a 1/4 inch, where this is the 60, and I'm throwing you way off, I'm sorry, babe. This is a 60 degree bit, but you can see it's 1/4 inch cutting width and 1/4 inch shank. But you can get a 60 degree bit that is 3/8, which means it's a way bigger rounder here, or even 1/2 inch. It can still be 1/4 inch shank, but it might be big 3/8 cutting. And if you try to do some of these smaller letters with that, you won't be able to get deep enough. Is that the 60? That's actually, that's the 60. Anyway, you won't be able to get deep enough, and you'll lose a lot of width when you go to sanding. So I'm hoping that this kind of clears it up a little bit. If you have any questions, obviously, you guys know you can always email me or let me know. I'm happy to help however I can. But again, I wanted to do this in conjunction with cutting inset letters. You guys may or may not know we have a course that now is on the website. Well, it's not on the website yet, but it will be soon. That actually we're going to be filming. Ryan and I are filming it, and it's all about inset cutting letters and artwork, and we're really diving deep into cutting everything inset. If you guys have questions on it, let me know. It is a course that we're charging for, so it's a little bit different than this, which is going to be on YouTube. But so if you guys have questions on it, let me know. But we're excited about diving really deep into inset stuff, because that seems to be a challenge for a lot of people. Outset seems to be much easier for new carvers to start, because inset letters don't give you a lot of room for error. Anyway, guys, that is it for this video. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. If you need any supplies, you know the website. It's right behind me, makeawoodsign.com. If you have any questions, please email me, eric@makeawoodsign.com. Did I say that already? Probably did. Probably said it 2 or 3 times. And keep watching. We got more stuff coming up, some really cool projects I think you guys are going to like. So thanks again. We love you. We'll see you on the next one.